Okay. Alrighty. All right. So here's what we have for today. There's the reason why I'm going to start with some definitions is because if we look at how we use these terms in everyday language, we tend to use them interchangeably. Okay. And so I'm going to start with some definitions that give us what's called a construct definition. A construct definition is a definition that researchers can use that is common so that they know that they're studying the same thing. Okay. So, first of all, I want to talk about our basic drives. Okay. Now, drives are not based on experience. Drives in this next term that we use, motivate us to take care of some basic need that we have. Okay. So some examples of drives is when we're hungry, we eat. When we're thirsty, we drink. When we're aroused, we have sex. Even intimate love and survival instincts are all part of our basic drives. Okay. And probably, again, one that kind of a good example of how drives can sometimes be mixed up with things like emotions and feelings or even motivation is the drive for intimate love. Okay. If you look at most psychological theories on intimate love, okay, intimate love being that person that you obsess over, that you want to be with, that you can't live without, that you want to potentially develop a family with, have children with, or in some cases just want to have that really close, loving relationship with. Okay, so intimate love. Um, uh, for most of psychology's history, we've used emotional based theories that kind of explain why we get engage in intimate relationships. Okay. But around the year about 2000, the research really took off between 2000 to 2014 or so. Um, we started putting people in MRI machines and we would show them this is a very basic example of the research protocol. A very basic uh, view is, let's say we put you in an MRI machine and we show you random pictures, mountains and hills, or just random, probably not very emotionally based pictures. Okay. And then once in a while, we'll flash a picture of your intimate partner, that person you say, I'm totally in love with. Sometimes we'll flash it for less than half of a second. So you probably not even conscious that we put that picture in front of you. Sometimes we'll put it up there for 10, 15 seconds where you really become very consciously aware of you're looking at a picture of your intimate partner. Now, if intimate love was a basic but was an emotion, the area of the brain that we would expect to light up would be the limbic system, especially the amygdala and the hippocampus. And that should be the area that becomes very active in the brain because the majority of our emotions kind of resonate from that area of the brain. Okay. But that's not actually what we found. Okay. We actually found that the area that lights up, that becomes very active in your brain when you're looking at an intimate partner is the brain stem. Okay. And the brain stem regulates autonomic responses such as hunger, thirst, sex, the survival instinct, fight or flight, in our experience, and somewhat to do with pain, not totally. Okay. So it seems that, at least for humans, I haven't seen, I'm not sure how they would do this in animal studies. So, at least for humans, intimate love, that need to have someone, is a basic human drive. It's not an emotion that we kind of choose. Okay. And that's the important things about the base of drives is we don't really choose to be hungry or thirsty. Intimate love, yes, we can hold off on it, and sex, we can hold off on it, but eventually it's a drive that needs to be fulfilled in some way. Okay. And then, of course, the survival instincts and whatnot are along with that. Okay. So drives are basic, and I'm going to put this very biologically based needs and experiences. Okay. Motivation, and the reason why I say biological, and I want to make this clear, is because the area of the brain that gives way to these experiences are in the automatic areas of the brain. We usually don't think about our heart beating or taking a breath or digesting food. It's something that is just very automatically and biologically based. And this is what a lot of researchers are really starting to find about things like intimate love. Okay. Motivation is a combination of these drives and experiences. Okay. And we'll get into things like classical conditioning, which is associative learning. Food, we often, the best example is we pair the golden arches with McDonald's, and we kind of get hunger pains when we see those golden arches if we like McDonald's. And this is what plays a role in things like preferences in motivation. Okay. So we may all be driven towards sex and intimate love, but who we engage in those behaviors with is determined by our learned history. If you remember, a week or so ago, I mentioned how, for example, some individuals can mix up the drive of love, for example, from a parent, and pain, and they can mismatch those things. So they're motivated towards individuals who are bad for them, even though their basic drive is trying to drive them towards someone who they could eventually have a good, strong bonding and loving relationship with. Okay. So, but on the other hand, motivation can also be a positive thing, and this is the important part of this. I kind of talked about the dark end of motivation, but motivation can also be something that is rewarding, like achieving a goal or achieving some aspect of our world. Okay, our drives operate in the basic brain stem, the forebrain. So it's kind of starting with the neck area, going up. Motivation really deals with what's called the dopaminergic system. Okay, because dopamine is our basic kind of brain motivation chemical. Whenever we receive a reward of some type of even emotional accolade, or or we eat food because we're hungry, we start to release dopamine. Okay. Um, and so this is kind of, so this area, there is some areas within the brain stem that are dopaminergic, but really the area between the limbic system and the cortical area are really our highly dopaminergic areas, because we're rewarding those things that are happening on the emotional level and on the cognitive level that are happening higher up in our higher cortical or our higher thinking areas. Okay. So this is motivation. And what motivation does is it helps us continue seeking out those things that fulfilled some of our basic drives and our basic needs. Okay. And then we have emotions. Now, emotions are a little bit different than drives and motivation. While they do work together, especially in the survival instinct, emotions are biologically based, okay, for the sake of our conversation here. And it provides us with an internal awareness, um, and provides an external signal to others about one's experience. Okay, so for example, looking at a baby and smiling, that's a communication, as we talked about the other day. Seeing a snake and feeling fear, or feeling the emotion of fear, are very adaptive, and they tell us, one, internally, that we need to do something, and two, it's signaling to others, hey, there's a snake over here, or hey, there's a cute baby over here. Okay, so emotions tend to, again, work on that serotonin level, which is very heavy within the limbic system, um, especially dealing with the amygdala and the hippocampus, which deals with memories. Okay, and this is what's going to connect here in a little bit while when we emphasize this more, the notion of feelings. Okay, but for now, the thing to remember is emotions are our internal signaling system. It's our, again, if you want to use the word biological, even though there's a lot of life experience that goes into this, it is our biological system telling us something is going good or something that is going bad. Okay. When we get to things like psychological disorders, we will see that, for example, things like depression, and mood disorders is when a disorder has hijacked this emotional system. Okay. When we look at anxiety disorders, we're going to see that it's a big hijack of our motivational system, or arousal disorders are when these systems are not functioning the way that they're supposed to. Okay. And so that's the other part that we'll talk about as we move through the class. Okay. Now, affect, also known as your mood, is your general sense of being. It's how you're feeling right now. So if you're tired and grumpy, or if you're awake and motivated, if you're pre-coffee or post-coffee, if you're a night person or a morning person, your affect is that general feeling that you have throughout the day based on whether things are how they're supposed to be aligned in the universe or they're not. Okay, so a person stating that they were moody all day, even though they were at a carnival, for example, they just weren't feeling it. Okay, so affect, the way affect really plays on these systems is it really provides us with a base of interpretation. Okay, if we're really, really, really in a good mood, or a good, I should not use the word well mood, but affect, if we're really, we tend to see things for their potential, for their, if you want to, if you want to use that analogy, when we're in a really good affect, we tend to have rosy glasses on. Okay, and we tend just to kind of see things for their surface level. Okay, and so we're probably going to experience motivation and emotion in more of a kind of abstract way. Okay, when we have a low affect, so when we're moody, we actually, I know this sounds strange, but we tend to see things a little bit more real. We tend to analyze things more. We tend to pick apart things more. It may not seem like it because we're in a moody mood and we don't feel like it, but that's partly why we don't feel like it, because our system is so exhausted from analyzing every little aspect. We're tired. And so even when we're in a mood and we say, I don't feel like doing anything, usually our brain's going 100 miles an hour, picking apart every little detail of what we're experiencing. Okay. So affect really plays a role on how we experience our drives, motivations, and emotions. Okay. All right, feelings. So feelings in most languages, even in some academic discourse, even when if you go to a therapist and stuff, may use these terms interchangeable, emotions and feelings. Okay, but for our definition that we're going to kind of go with for our academic discussion, as you would say, is we're going to use feelings as referring to one's cognitive interpretations of emotions, which is based on past experiences and current situations. For example, when a person says, I'm scared of you because the mask what reminded me of the movie Scream. Okay. Now, the reason why we separate these two is goes back to the various examples that I've already used. One, if children are not giving the wrong language for their emotions, their motivations and drives, the proper words to use, they can mix them up. They can get, for example, love and hate mixed with each other and confused with each other. So that's one reason that we kind of have to separate the two, because there can be a mismatch. The other reason is we could have something that is very emotionally salient. So it arouses the individual both the same amount. So you're both getting the same shots of serotonin, hormones, all of those things that give way to emotions. But the two individuals can experience that same thing totally different from each other based on your experience. And probably, again, well, we'll get more into this a little bit later. But let's bring up maybe some analogies that might help kind of bring all of these together, because all of these work together to give us our complete experience. None of these operate on their own. Okay. So, one good analogy to use is the analogy of a tree. Okay. So, our tree, the roots are things like our collective past. You know, you want to think about things like historical trauma, which we'll get to. Your genetics and biology. So, for example, your temperament, the reactivity of your dopamine systems and your drive systems, and environmental conditions. You know, are we born into an impoverished environment versus an enriched environment? Do we have the complete social systems in place to support our growth and development? Okay. So if these are our roots, the trunk is our drives. Okay, this gives a way to what's going to help the tree survive. So it's getting nutrients, food, water, reproduction, a bee to be a partner with in getting to another tree, those types of things. Okay. Once we get above the trunk and we start to get into the branches, we start to get into motivation. So based on our drive needs, and then also based on who we are as an individual, what are our aspirations? What are our goals? What are those things? That then gives a way to motivation. Okay. Now, the branches and the leaves give a way then to our emotions and our feelings. And the reason this is that these are mostly influenced by the environment. Okay. The amount of sunlight, the amount of rain, how much wind there is, how much force is being put upon this tree for survival. And our emotions try to strengthen our tree in the face of adversity. So if our emotional system is working good during times of high wind and high stress, our branches are becoming stronger and our connection with our leaves tend to be much more strong. Okay. Same with our feelings. If we're gonna give this to the leaf system. Okay. Based on the right amount of sunlight, the right amount of everything that you need in order to survive, gives a way to your interpretation of what your emotions are doing. So sometimes we'll shed some leaves if there's too much sunlight, not enough water, based upon what information we're receiving from the rest of the tree. Okay. And then affect then is when we take everything in combination and understand our overall health of the tree during a given period of time. So are we uh, in a good place or a bad place in a given period of time? So I don't know if that analogy helps wrap things together, but I do just want to emphasize the role a little bit between emotions and feelings. Okay. Emotions, as this again, kind of teasing the difference between these, is plays in the theater of the body. Okay. Meaning that it's our physiological response that's telling us that we need to do something. Okay. Whereas feelings play out in the theater of the mind. There's what's processing what our emotions are telling us. In this model, emotions precede feelings and feelings proceed emotions. Okay. I will say that this relationship gets a little bit more complicated because we do know that you can um, uh, 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 use thought processes to control emotional responses. And that's really the basis of what's known as cognitive behavioral therapy, is that you're using your cognitive resources to take control back over that hijacked emotional system in the case of things like depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, or even in some cases like bipolar disorders. Okay. But even in normal everyday things, we kind of use our cognitive system to make it so we don't necessarily have the emotions that we're expecting to have or we don't want to have. Okay. Um, we know that emotions can be measured physiologically and that we can measure feelings by examining thoughts and interpretations of emotions. Okay. So these are, again, just kind of differentiating the two for the sake of an academic discussion. Again, we use these terms interchangeably, but in order to actually, um, investigate them, we really need to understand how they can be differentiated. Okay. And so I do just want to mention again when we get to emotions, um, uh, um, that again things like mood disorder and depression and bipolar stress disorders and anxiety disorders, when we get to the system, these disorders are really a hijacking of these both physiological and psychological systems. Okay. And even individuals with psychosis, such as schizophrenia and things like dissociative disorders, have both negative and positive symptoms that also greatly impact their emotions and feelings. So even with individuals with psychosis, this can again hijack these systems. Okay. Trauma, when not resolved appropriately, can also influence how these systems work and even give way to things like psychosis and mood disorders. Okay. So just kind of keep this in mind, keep this kind of in the back of your mind so that when we get to, I know I've been talking about big old week 8, but when we get to week 8, you remember that these systems that we're talking about right now are when they're running correctly. And then we'll talk about what happens when they get hijacked with some of these disorders. Okay. So Kind of moving right along, we do want to talk about the qualities of emotions. Okay. The one thing that often is misinterpreted about emotions because of our cognitive system is that they're situationally bound and they're based upon a physiological experience that is um, uh, um, bound to that situation. And what do I mean by this? Okay. We find that when people physiologically react to something with either emotionally, such as anger, happiness, fearful, all of these other emotions, melancholy, okay, we find that once that person takes them out of that situation, the physiological responses to that stop. Okay. Now you're probably going, oh, Dr. Peterson, I remember leaving a place, the boss, I got in a big argument at work and I went home and I stewed over it all night and I was just so angry all night over it, or a argument with an intimate partner and all of those things that, well, this is the thing that I want to give you some relief on. One, you don't drag that emotion with you. We do what's called rumination. We keep the feeling alive, not necessarily the emotion alive, when we leave a situation that has been highly emotionally reactive. Okay. So so when we talk about emotions, the thing that we should talk about is that they're situationally bound, and that when we take that emotion with us outside of the emotional arousing situation, we are ruminating about it. We're keeping it in our feeling system, which then drives the rest of our mood. Okay. And again, this is kind of the point of some current methods of things like mindfulness, and why mindfulness has become so popular, because often individuals who are experiencing distress are not experiencing that situational, emotional, biologically arousing distress. They're experiencing distress because we're keeping those bad past experiences in our mind, or that bad situation that just happened in our mind. And the purpose of mindfulness is to help us get control over our emotional, our I'm going to say feeling system, so that we can ground ourselves. And usually with mindfulness, what you do is you focus right here on the here and now. Okay. And really what this is attempting to do is make it so that your body system, which is recovered, isn't continually being re-traumatized by the feeling system that keeps those emotions going, even though the body says, hey, we're fine now. So why are we continuing to re-traumatize ourselves? Okay. And again, working with people who have gone through severe trauma, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapies, all of those are aimed at helping the person get control over that cognitive system that continually uh, gets the person re-traumatized with it. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we say that emotions in and of themselves are situationally bound. We keep experiencing them because we drag them with us out of the situation. This just emphasizes some of those points we made. Okay. This stuff we are going to go over later on. So again, when we talk about the emotion system, we're really talking about a signaling system. And it also includes that fight flight response working with our basic drives. Okay. So when we become aroused emotionally, we tend to have increased heart rates, pupil dilations, lungs, all of those kinds of things become very, very active because it's preparing ourselves to act when we become emotionally aroused. Okay. And so this just kind of emphasizes some of those systems that we often tend, if you go back to the biological system and look at that fight or flight response, that really is kind of the emphasis of this system. Okay. And again, when we look at some of the, well, we're going to actually skip this for now. Okay. Okay. Actually, you know what, class? I think I am going to stop right here because there are some slides I'm noticing that are out of place that need to be worked on. So I'm going to escape out of here. And because we went over a lot of stuff, I just want to know, take a check on everyone. So I'm going to ask really quick. I'm going to stop our recording.